Hi, everybody. We're back with week 4. This week is the parable of the rich fool. Um, this is a tricky parable because it's going to challenge some ways of thinking that are so normal to us. Maybe we don't even think about them. So the parable is this guy who has a good harvest, and he then goes and builds barns for his harvest. Like, he has a lot, so he's like, "Oh, my barns can't fit the harvest I got, so I'm going to build bigger barns, and I'm going to keep it there." But the problem comes for him when he says, well, now I can relax because I've got what I need. And that's the part of this parable that is going to really get at the heart of what Jesus is talking about. So it starts with a younger brother coming up to Jesus and saying to him, like, "Hey, tell my older brother to give me my share of the inheritance." And Jesus says something really interesting. He says, "Who made me the judge of you?" He's like, which is, I don't know, maybe he was being kind of tongue in cheek there. But Jesus says, he gets to the heart of the issue right away. He says, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed." So he talks about greed. Life does not consist in in the abundance of possessions. And that's an interesting idea there. I think one of the big things as this parable strikes at is, what does your life consist of? What is a successful life? Undergirding this parable is this tradition of the Old Testament, especially in Ecclesiastes, of what is your life? At the end of time, what are you going to say is a successful life? And when I'm speaking in the big group, I'm going to be talking about a lot about what are you investing your life in? Because number one, if your life is about either possessions or gain or status or whatever, even good things like family or grades or a job, if your life is about those things take over your life. The kind of catchy way of saying that is, your possessions possess you. And so you can gain and gain and gain, but at the end of the day, if that's what your life is about, you become a slave to those things. So that's one thing that's going on here. And then another thing that's going on here, this is especially the Ecclesiastes part, is if you're not investing in things in your life that are of the kingdom, your investment is going to return zero. So the idea is you can have a bunch of stuff, you can have a good reputation, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, that stuff is all kind of washed out by the brevity of our lives and the passing of time. And so the question becomes what is your life? And Jesus really is going to ask this question, because today we're not just doing the parable, we're also doing the part where Jesus is kind of the Luke Sermon on the Mount, where he's saying, don't worry about your life. Your life doesn't consist of food and things like this. And at the end of the day, our life consists of richness, being rich in God. And that doesn't mean we're saying, oh, possessions are all bad and we should never have any possessions. But I think the question is, what is our priority? Jesus says, seek first his kingdom. And there's a Luke version of that. Let me see if I can get that quote for you correct here. He says, seek his kingdom and all these things will be given to you as well. So he's saying, don't make your life about these things, but seek him, seek the things that matter, seek people, being rich in your relationships with people, build on God's kingdom. These are things that are going to last for eternity. And if you do that, you can trust that God is going to give you what you need. And you're not owned by those things. So this has a different take home for everybody, and kind of what the things we feel wrap us up, the things that we get tangled into. But as far as the study itself goes, I'm going to break it up into 3 sections. Verses 12 through 15 is the interaction before the parable. And what I'm getting here is what does it mean to covet? And why is that problematic? And the idea is basically that when we covet, we're wanting something that's not ours. is kind of the simple way to say that. And it's problematic because it's like toxic for our hearts. We're always dissatisfied and we're not paying attention to what God is actually doing. It's like our life isn't real. We're paying attention to what could be rather than what actually is in front of us. And so we just get pulled away from God. C.S. Lewis one time said, like, the only place you meet God is right now. You're not going to meet God in the past. God certainly works in the past, but like you interact with God right now, and you're not going to interact with God in the future. And Satan wants us to live either in the past in regret or in the future in like yearning for something that's not yet. He says instead live right here, and covetousness pulls us out of that. And also what's interesting about this little interaction Jesus has is that I like this quote. The younger brother didn't want a sermon. He wanted Jesus to do what he wanted him to do. And I think we can all relate to that a little bit. So the next section is the parable itself. And I'm going to ask you to engage with the parable. You know, what does this mean for saving for the future? Is that unhelpful? Is it not unhelpful? What does this mean about generosity? What does it mean to be wise versus being a steward of what God has given you? These kinds of questions. And then diving into a little bit of like the idea that our possessions possess us. Like how have you experienced that? And then the part about the investment, which I've kind of already talked about a little bit. So let me know if you have any questions there about the possessions possessing us or the empty investments. But then I'm trying not to give you too many questions here, but for after the parable, we're going to read that Luke account of the Sermon on the Mount. In that passage, I have a question here. Does this passage feel more like a challenge or an invitation? Some people read this and they're like, like God sees me, he knows me, he's going to take care of me. And some people read this passage and they're like, wow, that's really hard. And so I think it's going to hit your people in different ways. So I just open it up. Like, where does this hit you? Is this challenging you? Does it feel like a relief? You know, how is this passage impacting you now as we read it? And also there's a lot of practical advice to mine from the passage. Like Jesus says some things that are straight up just like, hey, do this, like sell your possessions and give to the poor. You know, like that's tough. And so like he gives some things here to do, but they're really hard things to do sometimes. The question is like, why do they feel hard for us? So like selling your possessions, giving to the poor, it's like, well, what if I don't have enough? You know, and so I want you to engage around that a little bit. Like, how is Jesus challenging our hearts right now that's what these parables do, right? They like shine a light on these places that we wouldn't normally look at. And then the final question I have for you is, what does it mean to seek his kingdom? Because I might say to you, like, seek God's kingdom and God's going to take care of you. And you're like, cool. And what exactly am I seeking? And so I hope you'll have a good like conversation about that. I relegated a question to guys and girls times because I thought that it wouldn't be as easy to answer in the mixed time. Where is it? Oh, there it is. It's Jesus says, it's on the first one, guys and girls. Jesus says, where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And then I just want to have the simple question, like, where are some places where we tend to put our treasure and how does that impact us? So an example might be let's say you are someone who really is worried about, wealth, right? And you might recognize like, I'm really worried about wealth and I'm always anxious. Like I'm not generous. I'm always worried. I'm stingy, right? That might be something you see. Or like, let's say you're really worried about like grad school or something like that. And you might just be like, well, I'm as like wrapped up in school all the time. And I don't have time for people. And like, I want to spend time with people, but I always feel like I have to do this. And there's this constant tension in your life. And it's just good to get these things out in the open so you can talk about them. Because the next question, like, well, how is this challenging you? Like, so if I were someone who was worried about money, the challenge for me might be like, I feel like God wants me to be more generous. And then you as a leader can maybe ask like, all right, well, is there like a way you feel like you want to be generous? And then I encourage you, like as a leader, to write that down and maybe follow up. You don't have to be in a big group like, hey, did you give to the church like you said you would? And they have to be like, no. But like you can follow up, be like, how's that going? You know, it's a little more more better personally. And then, of course, like, how can we support you? How can we pray for you? So hopefully that's helpful. And yeah, hopefully it's a good like launching point into the weekend for you guys. I think that's all I'm going to say. So I'll see you soon.